Time to 30 more seconds to make sure. Okay, I'll do the slides. Okay. Oh, right. Yeah. All right. Let me give the people their 2-minute warning because they're still mowing. Okay, gang. It's about time to get started, and I'll be nice and give you a 2-minute warning, but if you want to be in DNSOP, you're in the right place, and please sit down, and we hope prepare to be entertained. If you don't want to be in DNSOP, you're welcome to stay, but you might want to be somewhere else. Oh, you started the sheets. You started the sheets. Great. Sit down. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm just making sure it actually works. Okay, gang. Welcome to session 2 of DNSOP at IETF 101. I'm Suzanne Wolf. You may have noticed that my co-chair, Tim Wazinski, is not with us. If you saw the mail to the list this morning, Tim is not well and being taken care of, but as far as I know, he will be fine. Thanks to him for all the prep work he did at 1 o'clock in the morning before he left for medical treatment, and bless his wife for making sure he did. But I also want to introduce the lovely and talented Brian Haberman, who agreed to step in and help out with the logistics of running the meeting. As usual, any errors and omissions are mine. After all, as you've always suspected, Tim is much smarter and more organized than I am. So any issues are entirely my fault. Get well, Tim, we miss you. We have a Jabber scribe. I think Dan York has agreed. Thank you, Dan. Minute taker, Paul Hoffman. Thank you, Paul. The new and improved Note Well, which you've seen many times now that it's Thursday afternoon of the IETF week. We'll do the brief agenda bash, blue sheets, which Brian already started around. Mostly this is our new document scrum, as Tim has taken to calling it. As we've discussed, we've seen a whole bunch of interesting stuff go by. There's always an appetite for people to bring new work, either as formal working group items or just because they want to see some discussion. From interesting diamonds in the rough, or even visits from the IETF, bad idea fairy. You be the judge. Also, we like it a lot when first-time attendees bring work to our meeting, so be kind and be polite, please. We look for things that are of interest to us and will probably seem likely to be of interest to the group. Discussion on the mailing list is definitely a plus, but not necessary. Given the amount of conversation we had on Tuesday about Bert's presentation and the amount of conversation I've heard in the halls and other working group meetings that referred back to that, we decided that frankly, there's a bonus value attached to, does it address the points made in the talk that Bert Huber gave Tuesday about our over-designed and somewhat constrained and somewhat complicated DNS. It was Tim's idea to name the camel, though. For all of this work, and here and on the mailing list, we're interested in, is this work that's people feel is worth doing? But also, is it worth it? Do we want to adopt it as a working group item, which to us is a commitment to shepherd it through the process and eventually produce an RFC? Not everything interesting that comes through these doors will be or should be an RFC, but we like to know when people are willing to work on something and see it through the IETF process. For that and for, frankly, other commentary, authors are here. That's one of the great things about having our face-to-face meetings. And we can always take it to the mailing list. And we have a list of drafts here. I'm not sure whether Peter or Ray is presenting XPF. You're next. Yeah.
All right, good afternoon. Who of you have seen the XPF presentation or know what it is? Okay, there's plenty. I'll be very quick then. If you put a load balancer or a TLS unwrapper in front of another server, that server loses information about the clients, like the IP, the protocol used, etc. This proves to be a problem in many situations, including when that resolver does DNS64, for example. I understand this specific problem has occurred at a previous IETF. XPF is a proposal that adds this metadata to the forwarded query. It is specifically designed to be only used within your administrative domain. So this record will never leave your network. You will not send this to Google, etc. The first version led to some privacy concerns on DNSOP and at IETF. We feel we have addressed those by specifying that if you see an XPF that you did not expect, you need to return refuse. This means that if you accidentally leak metadata through XPF, you will not get DNS service. And we feel that this addresses the privacy problems. We have some running code in DNSDist, the Power DNS Resolver, Wireshark, and TCP dump for debugging. I hope to see some more running code soon. Please adopt.
Short and to the point. How many people have read the draft? Comments, questions, complaints?
So, Paul Wouters. I want to say that I wish more documents would actually have such a good handling on privacy matters. I was concerned about the idea in the original draft, and everything has been done really well. You've done a really good job at making sure that this does not get abused. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any views on putting effort into this work?
Hi, I'm Andrew Sullivan. I read this, and it is a good document, and I applaud the document. A good document of a straw for the camel's back idea is still like not a great idea, and I just like this seems almost designed to be the canonical example of the sort of thing we were talking about the other day, and that troubles me a little bit. That doesn't mean I'm completely opposed to it. It makes me a little, sore in the throat.
My name is not Inigo Montoya. So you say that a well-written server must refuse an unexpected instance. But what if I was a bad actor and I said, oh, I won't refuse this because I want to get this stuff. Oh, yum, 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 yum. Aren't I slurping all the private data? I said the evil bit.
So if in the specific case of say a DNS disk forwarding to a specific backend that does not honor the you must send refused rule, then yes, you will be slurping up all the data. But in any situation where, say, a home router gets some XPF code for some weird reason and it sends queries to different machines on the internet, they should quickly learn that they are misconfigured.
Right, but I think where I'm going is it is great to address it by saying you should behave well, but the fact is information will leak if bad actors choose to behave a certain way, which is probably unavoidable, and that's all you would say.
Ray, go.
So, George, I'm afraid this is one of those cases where it's just don't do that. XPF is only ever intended to be deployed on the front of a server farm. So a client should never ever be sending an XPF record. A router should never ever be sending an XPF record, or a router proxy should never be. This is something that is only intended and designed to be added by a load balancer, for example, DNS List, talking to a backend server cluster, and where they're in the same admin domain. So a bad actor server receiving DNS, you've basically got to be cooperating adults for this stuff to be used.
Or you need a very curious misconfiguration and a bad actor.
I'm Jim Major here. There's another individual draft quite similar to this called EDNS client ID option. And I've read both, and I know these are different. But on the other hand, I saw quite a lot of similarity, the information conveyed in these, and also privacy concerns. So maybe we might think about how to, I don't know if it's reasonable to unify them, but at least give some thought to these two documents.
So the previous presentation I gave on this had a slide that is not in this one that shows you where XPF lives compared to client ID. The two drafts serve very different purposes with very different privacy models, and I do not want to unify them. Also, I want to have the ability to have both in a packet.
Okay, yeah, I'm not necessarily insisting on, but thinking about similar things for both two documents, it seems to be law-based. Right.
And we'll give Lehman the last word.
Lars Lehman, NetNode. We cannot design protocol based on our wish that they are operated by good intended people.
Correct.
It will be misconfigured. Things will leak. So we must design for that.
And do you think we haven't?
To be honest, I don't know, but it was started to sound like it from the comments. So I just want to, veer the discussion back on track. So we must design for the situation that people actually misconfigure their stuff.
Yes, agreed. Okay, thank you. Oh, Ray, yeah.
Sure, because you're next anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm next anyway. This is not something that would normally end up being misconfigured. It would have to be misimplemented. Yeah, a router. Yeah, for you to be leaking information, you wouldn't be misconfiguring your router. Your router would have to intentionally include code that is not, and logic that is not intended for that part of the network infrastructure. Anyway.
I think we've arrived at the point of disagreement. I'm sorry? We were soliciting, sorry, we were looking for comment, not not making a decision here. It will make these guys it'll make these guys in the front row happy to have, to do some interpretive dance. But, we've got Beyonce in the back row too. So,
Wait, we're going to get to see Oliver.
Carry on, right?
Okay. Right. So, Peter just presented a draft with my name on it. I now presented a draft with Mukund's name on it, just to confuse you all. So catalog zones. Who's familiar with this? Have seen earlier versions? Okay, good. So not really going to do the elevator pitch. That's useful. Who's seen the latest version of it? The -04. On deadline day. March 5th, I think that was, from memory. So we have substantially reorganized the draft. When I was brought in to do the last review of this one and looked at it, and realized that it had quite a bit of a mishmash of, for example, things like a type which was an unordered list of domain names. We had other things where lists of prefixes were input inside one RR. A lot of the restructuring then goes around getting rid of that mix-up and having a clean separation between multi-valued types and single-valued types. We'd also had some objections to the use of crypto hashing as the way to generate a unique prefix for some labels. It's required in some places. And although the by9 implementation still prefers to use crypto digests, it's no longer mandatory. It's simply a recommendation. Because of these changes, we've now changed the protocol version string in this version 2, and I'll touch more on that in a moment. So yes, going back to multi-valued properties, there are various configuration strings. For example, what would be a good example? List of notified or masters, for example, where you need multiple values. And earlier versions, sometimes these would have actually just been individual RRs as a single RR set. But we've now changed that so that you've always got to have a prefix in front of each unique entry in the list. There'll only have to be one RR in a particular RR set. And the only difference between an ordered list and an unordered list is whether the specification for that particular property specifies that lexical ordering of the keys is needed. The APL record we previously were using for prefix lists now has to follow these same rules. So we're saying that an APL record can only have one prefix, and if you need multiple prefixes, then you have to use the multi-valued property syntax. And here we have an example of that. So each member zone has its own unique prefix within the catalog zone, themunique. And here's an example where we would have two separate values for this property, example prop, and they each have their own unique ID and associated with their value. So where we are with the implementation, this change doesn't actually reflect the current bind implementation, which was the previous version. Sorry. Shut up, Jeff. Bind 9.11 and Bind 9.12 are out there with version 1, which is what was in the earlier versions of the draft, more or less. But we have got an internal commitment to deploy this newer version, which we think is internally much cleaner and simpler to implement. I can't promise it'll be 9.13 or even 9.14. So we've got a new release schedule for bind releases now. And there is also a plugin that Peter has done at PowerDNS, currently only doing the version 1, I imagine, but I'm sure be very easily upgraded to support version 2. We've got an internal to-do list of stuff we actually want to do in the draft, but kind of that's going to depend on where the drafts end up sitting. One of the problems we've had primarily in this working group, in fact, probably in DNSX before this working group, was trying to define a common dictionary for name server configuration items. What bind calls a certain configuration item might be called something different in other servers, or maybe indeed, even if it's conceptually the same configuration item, might have different rules. For example, bind ACLs can include named lists of prefixes, other name server implementations might not. So that then leads on to the next issue with looking at having a vendor-specific prefix, most likely, as a way to get around that. So you could have NSC configuration stanzas and bind configuration options and so on, all in the same file. You may end up with multiple entries all meaning the same thing. but we think it's probably the only clean way to make different name servers interoperate without having to have some massively complicated translation dictionary from some hypothetical and in practice impossible common data dictionary into name server configurations. Don't know yet whether this is going to go in the draft or not, but there was an email sent to the list on 3rd March talking about how we might do templates so that you could say, well, this set of zones will all take the configuration from this domain name over here, and some other domains might take it from there, rather than each individual domain in the catalog having to have its own complete set of properties specified all over and over and over again. There are some minor gotchas on that because of the way that DNAME works. If we did use DNAME, it would be rather all or nothing. So you could say take all of the properties from the template, or you could have all of the properties manually specific or manually configured for that one domain name, but you wouldn't be able to mix and match the two. My personal inclination is that that's actually okay. I mean, yeah, it would prevent the ability to override one specific value from a template. But nonetheless, catalog zones would still allow whatever configurations you like. You just wouldn't be able to take advantage of the template syntax to achieve that. Any questions?
Paul Hoffman. I'm a little bit concerned that ISC is now implementing version 2, even though it looks like there's going to be more changes. Can you talk a little bit about that and whether we're going to get stuck?
What's the good answer for that one? It's mostly on the recognition that I think there are some design flaws in version 1. It is out there already. Yeah, it wasn't quite right. We want to get it better, but we also don't see that there's necessarily much point in continuing to document version 1 when we know that we're going to go ahead with this new version. And whether we fit templates in this version or not is to be determined.
Petr Špaček, CZNIC. I will be the first to invoke the camel in this session, and I have a feeling that this just is stretching the DNS protocol too far. I understand that having everything in band looks nice, but it means that we have to implement everything ourselves, right? So I think that there is sufficient number of configuration systems out there, including some specifications which were done by IETF and are widely used in different working groups. So that's the reason why I don't think we shouldn't proceed with this, or definitely not to make it standard, at least.
Yeah, I don't see those configurations being used for name server configuration. I don't think they actually do exist. As respects to the camel comment, this is not a protocol change. This is a provisioning system. It happens to use DNS zone data, much like RPZ does, but it isn't a change to any protocol.
Yes, understood. It's not a change to protocol, but it's something, another, load for the camel. And I think that data. We just don't. I mean, there are provisioning systems out there, and DNS shouldn't be abused for provisioning stuff, please. And if I have to invoke the magic, it's young and
So Benno Overeinde and Nandit Labs. This is interesting. So I'm interested. Sorry. No, but I was also following the discussions on the mailing list. I think it's important to at least to consider also, well, Tim's rephrased the comments of his colleague about operators' needs, and it doesn't, well, the current catalog zones didn't fit his operational requirements or the practice.
Not to speak ill of the injured, but Tim and I have spoken about that since.
Okay.
And there was a certain amount of miscommunication because we had not received any proposals from Tim's co-worker. So we have no idea what his co-worker's needs are because he hasn't told us.
No. Okay. But indeed, so considering the draft, I have some comments, but that's not important here. I think it's important to have operational people also looking at the document and if it fills their needs. And just, I agree with you, Peter. We shouldn't overstretch the protocol. But there might be use cases where they have just immutable, containers, whatever, and
we want to spin up some servers. And can we either address that with catalog zones or other ways? So
Yeah.
I'm very open.
Yeah.
And I'm positive indeed. I want to contribute, but
We do have people already using this. In fact, I can see one of them right now. Yes, as Tony hides. Perhaps as Tony's able to say a few words about his experiences actually using these in anger. I don't mind him jumping the queue for us.
Tony Finch. I'm using it in catalog zones on my experimental DNS server. I've advertised this as a facility to my users because we have quite a lot of stealth secondary servers scattered around the university who have copies of all of our internal zones. And certainly for the purposes of configuring that kind of server, the catalog zones make it much simpler and much more easily maintainable. For our public authoritative servers, it is a bit more of a difficult fit because the problem I would like, or the thing I would like to be easier, is to receive a list of zones from other sites that I act as a secondary for, and have that sort of nicely contained within a little secure bubble so that they can't mess up the rest of the configuration of my DNS server, so that I don't have to manually maintain the list of the zones that I secondary from.
Okay, sure, but that, if I understand you correctly, should be trivially achieved by having them serve you a catalog zone that just has their zones in it.
Yeah, I mean there are details of the features that catalog zones don't quite have now, but the principle, the rough way it works is quite promising from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns for me, and going back to this slide, I'll be quick, about the DNAME stuff, is not letting perfection be the enemy of the good. I mean, some of the responses we had to the DNAME proposal were, yes, wouldn't it be nice if we could have nested templates? Well, yes, I'm sure it would be very, very nice. But that would be adding quite significant complication to the deployment. And the DNAME stuff is an optimization and wouldn't prevent any particular configuration from happening. It would just mean you'd have to explicitly configure that member zone instead of copying the values from a template.
Dan York just jabbered, channeling Mux, who says operators want something like this because external provisioning systems don't do well across name servers or written for a particular operator, and also are bug prone.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shane Kerr. I looked at the earlier versions of this draft with great interest, and the latest version, especially the stuff for the vendor things, made me think that it probably does both too much and too little at the same time. It doesn't help administrators that have lots and lots of zones. There's other problems associated with that. And I was trying to think of ways to hack into it, but it would increase the complexity of this quite a bit. And at the same time, if you want to do server configuration outside of just zones, you have to do all this vendor specific stuff. I think if you were going to design a protocol to do this today, of course you wouldn't put it in the DNS. It very much feels like a case of, I've got a hammer, so I'm going to put it in the DNS. So I guess I basically agree with Peter. I think we should come up with a protocol which does the same things, but we don't have to use the DNS to do this. Dear God, please no.
I'm going to close the mic line, but yeah, I saw down, and I'll close it after that.
Hi, Peter van Dijk, PowerDNS. As Ray said, we have an implementation. This implementation lives outside of PowerDNS. Not a line of code in PowerDNS was changed. There is no weird potential for interaction with other features. The complexity envelope has not been pushed. This in response to Peter saying this is a straw. Of course it's a straw, but I think it's a straw on a different camel.
So it's a straw on a dromedary. It's a straw on a dromedary. Yeah.
We've got entire herds of camels, it appears.
Hi, it's John Dickinson. I kind of don't like the fact that this is in the DNS. The thing I do like, though, is what the not authoritative guys did with not C. I don't know if you looked at that.
No.
Okay. No. If reconfiguring zones and things, it provides a really nice interface with transaction. You can roll it back and you can commit it. that kind of thing. It doesn't do everything that your draft talks about, but I think it would be a really good starting point to maybe merge the two ideas together, or take something from what they've done.
Yeah. I mean, we do already have this feature in Vine, and we're unlikely to take it back out again.
So Dan York relaying Brett. I'm sorry, I just lost track of it. In support of Benno, we do plan to use some immutable servers at Nominet, and as such, this is interesting to us. But we also will consider using other systems out of DNS, such as Ansible. And that was his comment there.
Yeah.
Both options are currently being considered, and as such, I will be following the draft carefully.
Okay.
And I would just like to say that I appreciated Andrew's comment that said he feels sad that DNS is becoming a camel farm.
Okay. Well, I guess.
So Shuman is next, if you want to come up, but also just looking at, we definitely want to continue the discussion on the list, because frankly, I'm hearing very mixed feelings in the room, which is always interesting. Who in the room has read the draft?
Sorry, which draft are we talking about now? Mine.
Yes.
Catalog.
I'm forgetting the name there.
Catalog zones.
And I'm sorry? I'm just curious who has read the draft, who has read this draft, the catalog zones draft, and who in the room, and we will be taking this to the mailing list also, but who in the room feels strongly that it's a good idea for us to pursue it? Now, please. I'm sorry? The guy that's still up here, catalog zones. Yeah. Sorry. It's been a long week already. For the catalog zones draft, we're hearing some strong feelings, multiple directions of the people who've read the draft. If you think this is work that the working group should pursue, or at least continue to discuss, please hum now. If you do not think that this is worth pursuing, we shouldn't continue to pay attention to it, please hum now. Pretty split. Thank you.
Suzanne, just to be fair, you will do that for the first draft as well, because you are changing the way you are proceeding.
Yes. No, I wasn't going to ask for a hum on the first draft because I only heard negative commentary in the room. But in any case, what happens in the room is not normative. What happens on the mailing list is normative. So please, your views on all of the drafts will be fairly considered. And thank you for your comment. It's helpful to keep me on track.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
I operate this?
Yeah, if you want. It's just click.
Okay. Hi, folks. So I'm here to talk about a new draft that we've written on multi-provider DNSSEC. So after Tuesday's very entertaining session, I kind of felt obligated to provide a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't know if Bert Hubert is in the room. Is he? Okay. He went home? Okay, all right. Well, he can relax and take a deep breath, because what we're doing here is we're not actually proposing any new DNS protocol enhancements at all. What we're simply doing is providing some new operational deployment models. So I think the camel will approve and agree that we're not trying to torture it too much or cause it to do too many additional contortions. So let's see how this goes. So the problem statement, and it's not really a problem, but rather a scenario we're trying to accommodate, and that is that many enterprises these days use the services of multiple DNS, managed DNS providers to operate their authoritative DNS service, and we want to be able to successfully deploy DNSSEC in such environments. Now, this could be fairly straightforward, or depending on the kinds of features that you use in the DNS, they could actually pose a little bit of a challenge. and I'll go into that a little bit later. We present 4 deployment models in the draft. So the first 2 are the really important ones, serve only and sign and serve. The last 2 I'm not really going to discuss here. They're kind of variations and combinations of the first 2, and they're kind of, because they inherit the weaknesses of both, they're kind of the worst of both worlds too, so they're not ideal. So the serve-only model, this is probably the most straightforward one to describe, and that's where the zone owner runs their own master server, signs the data, and pushes out the zone to multiple DNS providers using traditional DNS zone transfer mechanisms. This is a well-understood model. It's been deployed in the field many times. It works, but it has one notable limitation, which is that if you use certain types of non-standardized DNS features, then it doesn't work. Okay, so I'm going to describe what those features are now. Generally speaking, they have many names, but a lot of the DNS providers, in my experience, lump them under this general term traffic management, which includes things like global server load balancing, probing and failover records, and more complicated things like that. And these type of responses are often dependent on some characteristic of the querier or dependent on examining the dynamic state of the network before determining what response should be returned. So ideally, they are best determined at the authoritative server itself, or at query time, or some combination of both. I think folks in this room are probably very familiar that Paul Vixie famously had a term for these things about a decade ago. Anyone? Stupid DNS tricks. Yes, exactly. Right. So, but we have to, and he made some very cogent arguments on it, which almost all of them I agree with. But the reality is, in today's world, these are so pervasively deployed that we just have to deal with them, and DNSSEC has to follow suit. So that's why we are interested in the next model, which we're calling sign and serve, where the zone owner typically uses provider-specific APIs to update the zone to the providers. The providers sign and serve the data to the rest of the world. What did I do here? This model can support DNSSEC for those non-standardized features if the provider in question has the ability to sign those dynamically generated responses. And I want to mention that not all of them do. Some of them do, some of them don't. So that's still a kind of a failing in the DNS industry today. But for the ones that can sign them, the common strategies are doing on-the-fly signing. It's probably the easiest way to do it. And the other way is if you can enumerate all the answers in advance, you can pre-compute those answer sets, pre-sign them, and then algorithmically determine at query time which one to respond, which response and signature to return. That actually works, and there are some companies that actually do that too. So in these models, when in the multi-provider configuration, the key challenge here is that we need to be able to manage the contents of the DNS key and DSRR set carefully in a way that allows validation to always succeed no matter which provider you query and get the response from. And the strategy that we suggest in this draft is that each provider has to import the zone signing public keys of every other provider. And if you read through, I'm not going to explain it now, it's a little bit subtle how it works, but if you read the draft, it should become clear how that works. Let's go a little bit quickly. I describe 2 models, and these are not random models that we picked out of our head. We've actually sat down and talked with actual managed DNS providers to see if these seem operationally viable, and they do. So the first model, without going into too many details, is that there is a common KSK that is operated by the zone owner, and there's a unique ZSK assigned to each provider. And the second model is that there is a unique KSK and ZSK for each provider, and the zone owner operates a DSRR sets on top of them that kinds of glues everything together. All right, so there are some subtleties in how this all works. You saw some of the chatter on the mailing list, and some people had to read the document twice to do it. But there's a section that I added on validating resolver behavior. If you look through that, it'll all become clear. And that's about it. I know the chairs are probably going to ask some questions, so I'm going to preemptively just say what questions I wanted to ask to the audience. Is first, is this a useful document for the DNS operations working group to be working on? If we ask for adoption, what category of adoption should we ask for? Currently, I just put it out there with a very low bar informational, but maybe an argument can be made that there should be a BCP if we can all agree on the models. Are there additional models that we've missed that should be documented? And the question, I already asked this on the list earlier today, for sign and serve, if we present too many models and providers implement some disjoint subset of those models, we're going to have an interoperability challenge. So my question is, should we recommend one specific model, or should we narrow down what we're suggesting? Okay, so I'll stop here.
Yeah, since this is a brand new document, we are really just looking for comments. We're not going to decide today what to do with it. We're looking for how much interest there is, and we're looking for, if people seem interested, we would like to identify some reviewers that we can hold their feet to the fire.
So, Suze, can you ask how many people have read the document?
But how many of them have read the document? Excellent. How many are willing to commit to further reviews? Let's take comments first, and then we'll try to get some names. Paul, if you could do that.
Well, as I just raised my hand, that signaled that I am in favor of the working group picking it up. This was certainly something that came up it came crystal clear in the wake of the attacks on Dyn a year and a half ago that a lot more people are looking to have multi-vendor setups, and I think it's a mistake for any particular organization. While people unfortunately tend to be a little feature locked depending on some of the other stupid DNS tricks issues you brought up, but to the extent that those are solvable, the multi-vendor DNSSEC, I think, is a really important feature for the resiliency of the internet. And so I'd like to see the working group tackle it.
Okay, thanks, Tail.
Hi, Carl Henderson with VeriSign. Hey, Shimon.
Hey, Carl.
I'd like to throw my weight behind Model 2 with two questions. Is this in production any place? Is anybody doing this? Do we have a...
So are you asking if any actual managed DNS provider is doing this today? Right. Not to my knowledge. So at this point, I've only had conversations with them, and they're open to deploying the mechanisms that allow this to work. I've done some simple lab tests with these environments to make sure that they work, and they seem to work fine. Okay. But I don't know of any actual managed DNS vendor that can do this today.
So I guess a follow-up question, Model 2, I understand correctly, we're going to have a larger response, at least 2 KSKs and 2 ZSKs.
Right, for the DNS key response, that will be larger, right? So the zone responses for other data in the zone are going to be what they used to be, right?
Right. Should we address that in the draft?
Well, it's certainly worth mentioning. There are, people who run large DNS key sets in the wild today, right? And without notable issues. But it's worth noting. Thank you, Carl.
Wes Hardiker, USC ASI. For those in the room that want DNSSEC to be further deployed and increased to go up, I think this document is a must. And I think it's a good start and well written. For those that want DNSSEC to die a horrible death, should probably hum on the negative side. Because the reality is that if we want to, there's this type of usage is going up, not down. So we either have to figure out a way to support it or not.
Right.
As to, should we pick one that's better or worse, I would say let's leave it as a pro and con list and just realize that there was another document in the past that my colleague Suresh wrote that displayed pros and cons of doing split DNS and how to do it. And he didn't he didn't say a suggestion other than don't do it. But if you're gonna have to do it, then here's the pros and cons of each of the ways, and I'd stick with that.
Okay, thanks, Wes.
All right, I'm gonna cut the mic line.
Hi, Matthijs Mekking. I read the draft. I would support adoption to this working group and what category we should aim for. That's where I came up. Since there are no current practices, as you mentioned, I think it should not be BCP.
Okay.
It should be informational.
Fair enough. Okay.
Lars Lehmann from NetNode, +1.
Okay.
To the extent that I would actually volunteer to help with this document.
Great.
Which you very seldom hear from me.
Thank you, Lars.
Dan York, I was going to say what they said.
Yeah, Jim Reed.
Sorry, I'll say what Matthias said. I think it's good and we should have that. I'm not volunteering to help with a document like that.
Okay, all right. All right, Jim.
Jim Reid, I'm going to introduce another animal into this DNS menagerie that we're creating here. And I'm struck by Boxer, the horse from Animal Farm. If we can just throw more stuff at this DNSSEC thing, we'll get more people to actually sign their zones. And I'm sorry, I strongly disagree with what's been said at this meeting so far. I really can't see adding more parts, moving parts to this DNSSEC signing thing, actually helping getting this stuff deployed. I really strongly disagree with that. Now, it's great we've got hosting providers showing some interest in that, but are there customers showing any interest in this? Is this really going to move things forward? If there's any kind of evidence of that, then yes, I would be more willing and receptive to consider this idea, but frankly, I just don't see it. So I think I would be able to bet and think about this as being yet another example of another straw for the camel, or in this case, Boxer.
Right. So to answer your question, Jim,
We did close the mic line.
The reason I wrote this draft is because there is a customer, namely the company that employs me, who wants to do this, right? And it's a big company. And so as far as are there many customers out there, I think the problem is there aren't many commercial customers for DNSSEC in the first place. So that's a deficit we're going to have to address at some point.
Yeah, but I think
to the extent,
I think that's a problem we should be trying to fix. Not trying to deal with this, not quite a corner case, but it's just one small example. I think we look at this DNSSEC signing thing in the large. Why aren't people signing?
Right. I understand that, but I would disagree that this is a corner case. Increasingly, more and more enterprises are going to
Siobhan, I exaggerated for effect.
Okay.
It's an isolated example, and it's very relevant to your business.
Mhm.
But is it really going to move the needle in terms of getting wider uptake of signing? I have very much doubt it.
This sounds like we should continue on the mailing list. Thank you.
Okay.
And Matthias for the Mixford draft. Thanks. Hold on.
So this is still low. Okay, so basically I thought it would be nice to say something on the DNS hackathon that we did. Most people were actually working on TODO, but there were actually also other people, me and Shane, working on something else. We were sort of what we're going to work on. I said, I have this expired draft from 3 years ago and it would just be fun and to see if I can get this implemented. And Shane said, okay, let's do that. And the draft is minimal XFR. Basically, very short, minimal XFR is when I was working on OpenDNSSEC, I noticed that there were zone transfers coming out, incremental, and they were really large. They were maybe sometimes even larger than an AXFR. Basically, why? Well, you change RR sets, you resign RR sets, and then in the XFR it says, well, you have to delete the signature, and then you have to add the signature. Well, you actually already know that you have to delete the signature because the data has changed. So there's a lot of redundant data, and try to tackle that in that draft. Well, what we're going to do, we'll take a name server implementation and see if we can get that hacked in. We considered all for bigger open source name servers, authoritative name servers, but Power DNS for To All Knowledge at that time, and NSD didn't do IXFR as master, and the other was bind, and so we did it in NOT. Sorry. The results, we made 33 commits, 9 change files, almost 700 additions, and that's mainly because we copied the IXFR files and to minimal IXFR files and then made the changes. And we also found 2 minor issues in NOT, and we reported them, so I think that's a great outcome of the hackathon too. But so yeah, some more results, maybe not so important, but we, for a changed RR set, just add one record and delete one record. We saw a mix for this particular zone of 1270 bytes, and we actually saved 3 signatures, which was almost 900 bytes difference. We didn't do the resign case, but you could imagine I did a resign on the zone that we had, and we had a huge IETF that probably could be half the size. We tried RSA, we tried ECDSA. Obviously, the one has more savings than the other because of the length of the signatures.
We are almost out of time.
Yes, that's why I was rushing over it. So,
and what we'll look for is the draft and discussion on the mailing.
Yeah, I'm actually not here to try to get Mixfer resurrected or adopted. Maybe I'm actually maybe because we heard over the week a lot of talks about other improvements that we can do to a DNS replication. Obviously, packet size is important. There are large anycast networks running here. We have low time on when we want to replicate that. So those will benefit from the Mixfer kind of approach. But we also maybe want to have like IETF only. That is better if you're in a multi-master mode, where you can say, I'm not giving you an XFR, please try to IXFR from a different master. And there are many other ideas, like we saw a couple of them here, trying to get things in band. Maybe it's even better to have a separate protocol. It has been said before. So yeah, I'm here to see if people are interested in working on it, if we should do small adjustments, or if we should focus on maybe on a different protocol. I also have a camel note here. I'm suggesting that then we can delete IXFR and unused other RFC. And I would like to thank Petter for your support when we are trying to crash NOT, and you really helped out. So thanks for that. There will be a blog and the draft, and the links are there.
All right, I'm gonna cut the mic at Shane and make it quick.
George Michelson, AP Nick. So there's this thing around string edits and minimum string edits, and when you do things in orders and about, do you remember that thing with Gödel Escherbach about languages and how you do string edits, and some things can't reproduce the things that other things can? Because there's actually mathematics here about whether you can prove that these grouped edits are exactly identical to the atomic single transaction. I think they probably are. But do you think there's any chance that you could do some things in one that you can't do in the other? Because like in transaction logs, you have to do a lot of thinking about how do I group these into independently processable groups that have no impact on each other. And there's quite a lot of work in that.
One of you needs to buy the other one a beer. Fortunately, that will become very possible in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's something we have to look into. Yeah.
Frederico Neves, I think, Matthias, this is a great idea. I think we should try to move this forward. As you already said, we have large anycast networks. A lot of people here do have those, and I think this is not a straw in the back of the camel. I think this is more like a improved paw of the camel or a spine, because as you said too, the industry is, most the users are pushing the industry to shorter incremental publications. So the only way for us to meet the current demand and the future one is to reduce the amount of data, and this is a great way of doing that.
Just one question for you. Would you be in favor of such a Mixfer approach, like improving the current transfer protocol, or focus on a different protocol at all? Like,
no, I think we have plenty of space still for meta resource records on the protocol, and this is only something for the provisioning and for the infrastructure of DNS. This doesn't deal with the protocol by itself, so I think we could continue to use the way you were proposing. I think so. Yeah.
Okay, noted.
Hi, I'm Shane Kerr, the other person who worked on the hackathon. So I actually think it's a terrible idea and we should do another protocol for basically the same reasons that I discussed with the catalog zones. I think we've reached the end of useful life and we can do all kinds of sexy, fun things if we break free of the constraints of having to do it over port 53. So.
Thank you. Artem?
I'd like to get one, maybe feel of the room. Who thinks that transfer?
Have to go to
Okay.
mailing list for it.
Okay.
We're out of time and we have 2 more people we're going to have to cut. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tema Gavrichenkov, and here's my elevator speech. So, first, we the problem statement. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, so first the problem statement. There are some stupid DNS tricks and security challenges related to DNS, and enterprises just want to solve them somehow. And under most conditions, they prefer to go with some managed solution, or as some folks love to put it, cloud-based solutions. There are a lot of them present on the market, but there's one issue related to almost all of them. So you actually need to synchronize zones with those providers somehow. And yes, there's a standard mechanism for that. Yet, for many of those managed DNS providers, it's just not implemented. Like with Amazon Route 53, they were considering implementing zone transfers back almost 6 years ago. It's still not supported. The other example here is Azure, which is like having zone transfers on their like list of tasks for 1.5 years, but it's still not supported. What they do offer instead, that's the API, which is most likely JSON or XML or PC, RESTful as well. And you can use that to keep the data, the DNS data in sync. There are, as with almost any stable trend, there are solid reasons why things are going that way. First of them is that standard zone transfer mechanism doesn't support all those stupid tricks which enterprises always try to use, and sometimes depend on that heavily. Next, a cloud customer generally wants some status or feedback or statistics about how well the cloud service is actually serving his records. So the amount of requests per second, the traffic as well. And for some old and reputed companies like blockchain startups, there's no like zone transfers. The concept of zone transfer depends heavily on the concept of primary server, and a lot of companies just
Sorry.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We don't have time for the whole presentation.
Yeah, no, I'm going fast through this.
No. Is there a draft that you're inviting people to read, or what?
Yeah, there is.
Kind of skip to the end.
Okay, good. So,
because the slides are on the site, and I hope people will review them.
So basically, our idea is to create a common denominator for those RESTful APIs for new providers entering the market, as well as old providers who might want to ease the migration of customers towards the service, or maybe adding a new provider in line is also helpful. This is basically, as for Camel, we are not adding anything to the DNS protocol itself. We are just building on top of that. That's RESTful JSON over HTTPS. with concepts taken from the adopted terminology draft, plus all the features which we are present in the market. And DNSSEC, of course, is the first-class citizen from the very beginning. The protocol should be extensible because there will be more features in the future, and we'll need to support that. So in case this is something a working group wants to work on or participate in that, here is how we are going to do that. Here are key milestones. Hopefully we'll have something solid next year. Thanks. Questions?
So Dan York relaying for Tom Peterson. He says the draft API is blank. Perhaps it should use a similar interface provided by DOE.
I don't think so, and probably we have Paul Hartman here. Probably, the idea is not to introduce something new. The idea is to make some order across what's actually happening. And if you look at the APIs for Amazon or NS1 or Dyn, maybe they are completely different from DOE. So we are not going to change the way planets is spinning. We just want to bring some sanity, some order into that.
Okay, I'm going to cut the mic line. And unfortunately, we are not going to get to the last two presentations on the agenda. We've had livelier discussion than we really had time for. And thanks, everybody, for participating. And everything, the slides are there, and we can continue all the conversations on the mailing list. But for now, go ahead, Warren, and then we'll have to call it done.
Sure. Warren Kumari, huge apologies for the off-topic question. Spencer Dawkin lost his laptop bag somewhere in here. If anybody sees it, please take the secretariat.
A good question, thank you.
Peter Spacek, CZNIC. DNSOP don't have very well established track of designing RPC interfaces. So maybe this smells like not invented here syndrome, right? Again, we should be reusing whatever other IETF working groups establish, which is, for example, the YANC or something else. But please don't invent new RPC. It's already out there. Just, YANC and so on. That's it.
Okay,
Thanks for the input.
And we'll go to the mailing list for further discussion. I hope people heard ideas of interest. But I would love to go longer, but we really can't. It's the end of the day, and we will be losing our remote support. So thanks, everybody, and we will see you on the mailing list. We will summarize impressions from the reactions to these drafts here and get those to the list soon. And thanks for your participation.